In 1895, 36 years after its publication, Darwin's The Origin of Species was translated into Chinese, and in a short space of time became very popular among the country's intellectuals. Books by other evolutionary theoreticians who supported Darwin's views also began to spread through the country. These included Thomas Huxley, considered Darwin's most fervent supporter, and for that reason known as Darwin's bulldog. Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, the founder of the theory of eugenics and a prominent racist. The social Darwinist Herbert Spencer, who applied Darwin's theory of evolution to the social sciences. The spread of Darwinist thought through society in this way led to social turmoil, unrest, and conflict in China, just as it did in other countries. Darwinism had such an enormous effect in China in the 20th century that the Harvard University historian James Reeve Pusey wrote a book on that very issue, China and Charles Darwin. According to Pusey's account, Darwinism had a profound effect on Chinese intellectuals, encouraged them to adopt a revolutionary worldview, and provided major ideological support for the development of the communist movement in the country. The man who directed the course of the change that began with Darwinism was Mao Zedong. Mao's political ideology took shape during his student years in the early 1920s. His greatest inspiration was Chiang Dixu, the General Secretary of the Communist Party whom he met in Shanghai. Dixu's principal characteristic was his devotion to Darwinism. He taught Mao both Marxism and Darwinism. In his memoirs, written years later, Mao said, "Nobody influenced me as much as Chiang Dixu." The young Mao quickly came to prominence with the Communist Party, assuming the leadership from the second half of the 1920s. After the Korean War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, Mao became more involved in internal Chinese affairs. He frequently addressed the people, and millions of Chinese were made to listen to his speeches over loudspeakers. He would promise industrialization and regeneration in those addresses and say Marxism-Leninism is our only guide. Like his comrade Stalin, Mao wished to implement a ruthless collectivization program. His first action was to confiscate private property. Propaganda films portrayed the happiness this measure would allegedly bring to the Chinese people. Businessmen whose assets had been seized put on false displays of joy. Women also appeared in the same false images of happiness. In reality, however, the regime brought people fear, not joy. Hundreds of thousands of people were tried in the People's Court set up in Mao's first years in power and condemned to death for minor crimes. When Mao came to power, the majority of the population were living in poverty, working in harsh conditions in the rice fields and barely producing enough to feed themselves. But at least they did have enough to eat. The economic program known as the Great Leap Forward, begun by Mao in 1958, led China to complete disaster. Mao was portrayed as a leader who would solve all problems by implementing communist ideology in society. To that end, agriculture was first collectivized. Individual production was banned. Villagers were placed in huge communes consisting of thousands of people and forced to engage in collective production under military discipline. Mao would frequently visit the fields and inspect the villagers. At the same time, the Communist Party initiated a campaign aimed at ridding the whole country of harmful animals. Sparrows headed the list of animals thought to damage produce. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese set about exterminating them with catapults, stones, and guns. Those bringing in large numbers of dead sparrows were praised as model communists. Yet this odd campaign led to a result that the Communist Party had failed to foresee. The reduction of the sparrow population to 0 levels led to a huge rise in the insect population, which the sparrows had formerly fed on. These insects caused much more harm to the country's produce. In 1958, competitions were held between communes. The amount of produce from each commune was measured, and those that produced most were held up as examples. Every commune swore to reach higher quotas. At the following harvest, they announced that they had all exceeded their quotas. But the statistics were false. Communes resorted to deception in order to give the impression that they had produced more. Some even tried to demonstrate that they had filled their quotas by replanting harvested crops in the inspection fields. The communal system led to false statistics, which in turn gave rise to an even greater error. The Communist Party declared that China had a larger stock of rice and grain than it needed, and that in the future it would have to give the priority to other tasks. Tens of millions of peasants were therefore removed from the fields and set to work on the construction of a giant canal. These villagers were portrayed in propaganda films as happy and highly motivated, although in fact they were soon to suffer a terrible moral and physical collapse. Tens of thousands of people died as a result of industrial accidents in the hazardous conditions they were made to work in.